Dr. Elara Chun sat in her small research station at the edge of known space, watching stars drift past her window. She had been studying alien life forms for 5 years now, cataloging strange bacteria and unusual plant life from distant worlds. It was quiet work, sometimes lonely, but she loved it. Tonight felt like any other night until her computer started beeping with an urgent message. The signal was coming from Veloria Prime, a planet she had only read about in reports. The Valorians were known throughout the galaxy as peaceful people who kept mostly to themselves. They had never asked for help from other species before. Never. Elara's hands shook slightly as she opened the message. The face that appeared on her screen was unlike anything she had seen before. The Valorian had large, gentle eyes that seemed to shimmer with inner light. Their skin was almost translucent, showing delicate blue veins beneath. They looked fragile, like they might break if touched too hard. The Valorian introduced themselves as Ambassador Naleth, and their voice was soft, almost musical. "We need help," Naleth said, and Elara could hear the fear in those words. "Our world is dying, and we cannot save it ourselves. Please, we are begging anyone who might listen." Elara leaned forward, her heart pounding. She listened as Naleth explained their crisis. 3 months ago, an asteroid had crashed into their largest ocean. The impact itself had not destroyed their cities or killed many people, but it brought something terrible with it. Strange organisms from deep space had been frozen inside the asteroid for millions of years. When it hit the warm waters of Veloria Prime, these organisms woke up. The creatures were spreading fast through the ocean. They released chemicals that changed the water, making it poisonous to Valorian sea life. Worse, they made the water hot. What seemed like a pleasant warm bath to most species was burning hot to Valorians. The temperature in the contaminated zones had reached 45 degrees Celsius. Naleth's face showed pain just talking about it. "We cannot go near these zones," Naleth explained. "Our bodies cannot handle such heat. We have tried sending machines, but they fail in the turbulent water. We have tried everything we know, but nothing works. The contamination is spreading. In 2 years, maybe less, our entire ocean will be transformed. All our sea life will die. Our food chains will collapse. We will starve." Elara felt a chill run down her spine. She asked why the Valorians could not simply use protective suits to enter the zones. Naleth's expression became even more distressed. Several Valorians had tried, they said. Even with the best cooling suits their technology could create, the heat and the rough water conditions had killed them within minutes. Their bodies were too fragile, too sensitive. They had not evolved for such harsh conditions. "We know of humans," Naleth continued quietly. "We know you come from what we call the Death World, a planet of extreme gravity, dangerous weather, wild temperature changes, and predators. We have always been frightened by what we heard about your kind. But now, that is exactly what we need. We need someone who can survive in conditions that kill us. We need Deathworlders." After the message ended, Elara sat in silence for a long time. She knew she had to help, but this was bigger than one scientist could handle. She sent the message to Earth's Deep Space Command and waited. The response came faster than she expected. Captain Marcus Rivera was chosen to lead the mission. He was a veteran of dozens of first contact situations and had a reputation for being both brave and careful. He started assembling his team immediately. He needed engineers who could work in difficult conditions, scientists who understood alien biology, and survival specialists who could handle unexpected dangers. Sarah Walsh was the first to volunteer. She was an engineer who had worked on underwater installations in Earth's deepest oceans. She had once spent 6 hours repairing equipment in near-freezing water, working by touch alone when her lights failed. Marcus knew she was exactly who they needed. Dr. Chun joined the team as their xenobiologist. She had started this, and she wanted to see it through. 2 more crew members were added. James Park, a marine biologist who specialized in extremophile organisms, and Lisa Torres, a medical officer who had treated every kind of injury imaginable during her time on frontier colonies. As the team gathered on the ship called Resilience, Marcus showed them all the information they had about Valoria Prime. The planet was beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. It orbited a gentle orange star that gave off steady, mild light. There were no seasons, no temperature extremes. The gravity was only about 60% of Earth's. The atmosphere was breathable, but had much less oxygen than Earth's air. But the Valorians themselves had evolved in this paradise. They had thin bones that would snap under Earth's gravity. Their skin was so sensitive that bright light caused them pain. They could hear sounds at frequencies humans could not, but loud noises could make them collapse. They had no natural predators on their world, and had never developed the concept of physical conflict. To them, the very idea of violence was alien and horrifying. Sarah laughed when she read that the temperature of the Valorians, considered burning hot, was only 45 degrees Celsius. "That is like a nice hot tub," she said. "I have worked in water twice that hot." But Marcus reminded them all to take this seriously. What seemed mild to humans was deadly to the Valorians. They would need to be extremely careful around their hosts. A casual handshake could break bones. A normal speaking voice could cause pain. Even their smell might be overwhelming to Valorian senses. James Park studied the data about the extremophile organisms. He recognized the type. They were terraformers, organisms that existed to change environments to suit them. On their original world, wherever that was, they probably served an important ecological purpose. Here, they were an invasive species that would destroy an entire planet's ecosystem. Lisa Torres prepared her medical bay for both human injuries and potential Valorian patients, though she knew treating Valorians would be incredibly difficult. Their biology was so different, so delicate. A medication dose that would barely affect a human might kill a Valorian as the Resilience prepared to leave Earth's orbit. Marcus gathered his team one last time. He looked at each of them, these humans who were considered average by Earth standards. None of them had genetic modifications or special training. They were just people who had grown up on a planet that made them tough without them even realizing it. "We are going to save their world," Marcus said simply. "Not because we are heroes, but because we can. Because we are built for this in ways they are not. Let us show them what Deathworlders can do when they choose to help instead of harm." The ship jumped to faster than light speed, leaving Earth behind. Ahead of them lay Valoria Prime, a dying paradise that needed the strength only a Deathworld could provide. The Resilience dropped out of faster than light speed at the edge of the Valorian system. Through the viewing windows, the crew saw Valoria Prime for the first time with their own eyes. The planet looked like a pearl floating in space, covered in soft blue oceans and white clouds. There were no harsh deserts, no ice caps, no violent storm systems. Everything looked peaceful and gentle. "It is beautiful," Sarah whispered, and the others agreed silently. As they approached the planet, they could see the floating cities that the Valorians had built. The structures seemed to drift on the calm seas, like delicate flowers on a pond. The architecture was all curves and flowing lines, made of materials that caught the light and made the cities glow. To human eyes, the buildings looked impossibly thin and fragile, like they would collapse if anyone sneezed too hard. Ambassador Nalitha's voice came through the communication system, welcoming them to Valoria Prime. The ambassador sounded nervous and excited at the same time. They guided the Resilience to a landing platform that floated on the ocean's surface near one of the smaller cities. Marcus reminded his crew one more time to be extremely careful. They would move slowly, speak quietly, and avoid touching anything or anyone unless absolutely necessary. They had practiced this during the journey, moving in slow motion and whispering to each other. It had felt silly then, but now it seemed crucial. The landing ramp extended, and the human team stepped out onto Veloria Prime for the first time. The gravity felt strange, like they might float away if they moved too quickly. The air was thin, making them feel slightly lightheaded. The sunlight was dimmer than Earth's, casting everything in a soft orange glow. A group of Velorians waited to greet them, standing far back from the landing area. As the humans walked closer, they could see the Velorians more clearly. They were tall, much taller than humans, but so thin they looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. Their skin had a faint blue tint and was so translucent that veins and delicate bones showed through. Their eyes were huge and expressive, currently wide with what looked like fear. Marcus stepped forward slowly and raised his hand in greeting, remembering to keep his movements gentle. He spoke in barely more than a whisper. "Thank you for trusting us. We are here to help." The nearest Velorian, who they recognized as Ambassador Nalith, took a small step forward, but stayed well out of reach. "Welcome, Deathworlders," they said softly. "Forgive our caution. We have never been this close to beings from such a harsh world before." Dr. Chun tried to smile in what she hoped was a friendly way, but she noticed several Velorians flinch at the sight of her teeth. She remembered reading that Velorians had no teeth at all, only soft mouth parts for consuming liquids and soft foods. To them, human teeth probably looked like weapons. Sarah Walsh accidentally dropped a data pad she had been carrying. The device hit the metal floor with a loud clang that sounded incredibly harsh in the quiet Velorian environment. Immediately, 3 of the nearest Velorians collapsed to the ground, their hands over their ears, their faces twisted in pain. The other Velorians rushed to help them, making soft, worried sounds. Sarah stood frozen in horror. "I am so sorry," she said, but even her whispered apology made the injured Velorians wince. Marcus quickly made hand gestures to his team, and they all took several steps back to give the Velorian space dot. It took several minutes for the 3 Velorians to recover. One of them, a scientist named Corval, slowly stood up and addressed the humans from a safe distance. "Please do not feel guilty," Corval said gently. "We understand this is normal sound for you. We will adapt. We have prepared dampening fields for future meetings." Dr. Chun wanted to reach out and help, but she knew her touch could literally break their delicate bones. She had never felt so dangerous in her life. These beautiful, gentle beings were looking at her team like they were walking disasters. And in a way, they were right. The Velorians led the humans to a viewing chamber, where they could observe the contaminated ocean zone from a safe distance. The chamber had thick protective walls and viewing screens that showed live feeds from various monitoring stations. As they walked, the humans noticed that the Velorians gave them a wide path, staying at least 3 meters away at all times. When they reached the viewing chamber, Corval activated the screens. The humans saw the contaminated zone for the first time. The water looked dark and murky, completely different from the clear blue ocean surrounding it. Thick mats of growth covered the surface, and the water seemed to bubble and steam. "The temperature there is now 47 degrees Celsius, Corval explained, their voice full of dread. "It continues to rise. The organisms are thriving and spreading. We have lost 12% of our ocean to contamination in just 3 months." James Park studied the readings on the screens. The extremophile organisms were even more aggressive than he had thought. They were not just surviving in the Velorian Ocean, they were actively changing it to match their original environment. They released chemicals that altered the water's composition and generated heat through their metabolic processes. "Have you been able to collect any samples?" James asked quietly. Corval's large eyes became even sadder. "We tried. 7 Valorians died attempting to collect samples from the outer edges of the contamination. Even with our best protective suits and cooling systems, the heat and the rough water were too much. Their bodies simply could not handle the stress. We had to stop the attempts. We cannot ask more of our people to die when we know it is impossible for us. The humans exchanged looks. Marcus cleared his throat gently. We will need to enter the contaminated zone directly, he said. We will need to go into the water, collect samples, study the organisms up close, and deploy equipment to fight them. The Valorians in the room became very still. Corval stared at Marcus with an expression of disbelief and horror. You would enter that zone? Willingly? Captain Rivera, that is suicide. The conditions there would kill you. Sarah Walsh shook her head slowly. Ambassador, those conditions would not kill us. The water temperature is warm, but not dangerously hot by our standards. The rough currents are strong, but manageable. We have equipment designed for far worse environments on Earth. But surely your bodies cannot withstand such extreme conditions, another Valorian scientist said. No living thing should be able to survive in such violence. Dr. Chun realized the fundamental misunderstanding. To the Valorians, the contaminated zone was like the surface of a volcano, an environment of absolute extremes. They simply could not comprehend that humans regularly experienced and even enjoyed conditions harsher than this. On Earth, Chun explained carefully, people swim recreationally in water hotter than your contaminated zone. We have hot springs and thermal pools where humans relax for pleasure. Our oceans have currents far stronger than what we see on your screens. Some humans surf on waves that could crush your buildings. The Valorians were silent, trying to process this information. Corval finally spoke, their voice barely audible. Your world truly is a place of nightmares. How did your species ever survive long enough to develop civilization? Marcus smiled gently. We survived because we had to. Our world made us tough, but it also taught us to help each other, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is why we are here. The discussion continued for hours as the humans and Valorians planned their approach. The humans would need to modify some of their equipment to work in Valoria Prime's conditions. The Valorians would provide monitoring and support from a safe distance. Both sides would need to learn to work together, despite their vast differences. As the meeting ended, and the humans prepared to return to their ship, Corval approached Dr. Chun hesitantly. The Valorian stayed several meters away, but looked at her with curiosity, replacing some of the earlier fear. Dr. Chun, Corval said softly, may I ask you something personal? When you look at us, what do you see? Chun thought about the question carefully. I see people who built a beautiful civilization without violence or conflict. I see beings who achieved harmony with their world in a way humans never could. I see fragility, yes, but also grace and kindness that we Deathworlders rarely possess. Corval seemed surprised by this answer. We see you as terrifying engines of destruction, they admitted. But you came to help us. Perhaps there is more to Deathworlders than we understood. That night, aboard the Resilience, the human team reviewed their plan. Tomorrow, they would enter the contaminated zone for the first time. They would do something the Valorians considered impossible and suicidal. They would prove that sometimes, being from a death world meant having the strength to protect those from gentler places. The morning sun rose over Valoria Prime, casting soft orange light across the calm ocean. In the distance, the contaminated zone looked like a dark scar on the planet's beautiful surface. The human team stood on the floating platform, checking their equipment one final time. Their modified environmental suits were designed to protect them from the extremophile organisms while allowing them to work freely in the water. Dozens of Valorians watched from observation platforms far away, their instruments monitoring everything. Corval and several other Valorian scientists were in a control center, their faces showing a mixture of fascination and dread. They had tried to convince the humans to use remote drones instead, but Marcus had explained that human hands and eyes were needed for this work. Machines could only do so much. Sarah, Walsh climbed into the first submersible, a small vessel designed for underwater work. James Park took the second one, while Dr. Chun and Marcus shared the third. The submersibles were tough machines built for Earth's harsh oceans, and they looked almost crude compared to the delicate Valorian technology surrounding them. "We are entering the outer zone now," Marcus reported over the communication system, keeping his voice calm and professional. The submersibles moved forward across the clear water, heading toward the darkness of contamination. As they crossed the boundary, the change was immediate and dramatic. The water turned murky and thick with organic growth. The temperature reading on Sarah's display jumped from a comfortable 20 degrees Celsius to 43 degrees. The submersible rocked in suddenly turbulent currents. "Temperature is rising," Sarah reported. 45 degrees now. Water chemistry is definitely hostile. I am seeing high concentrations of sulfur compounds and unusual organic acids." On the observation platform, Corval watched the video feeds from the submersibles with growing anxiety. The Valorian scientist could barely look at the readings. To them, the humans had just entered hell itself. The temperature alone would have killed any Valorian in seconds, suit or no suit. The chemicals in the water were toxic even to breathe near, and the violence of the churning water would have torn a Valorian body apart. "Dr. Chun, please tell us your status," Corval said, their voice tight with worry. "Are you in pain? Are your suits holding?" Chun laughed, a sound that made several Valorians jump despite having heard human laughter before. "We are fine, Corval. Actually, the water temperature is quite pleasant. It is like a warm bath. Our suits are handling the chemistry with no problems." The Valorians in the control center looked at each other in stunned silence. Pleasant? This apocalyptic nightmare was pleasant to these creatures? The submersibles descended deeper into the contaminated zone. The extremophile organisms were everywhere, forming thick mats and strange structures. James Park collected samples using the submersible's mechanical arms, storing them in sealed containers. He was excited by what he saw, despite the grim situation. "These organisms are incredibly sophisticated," James said over the communication channel. "They have formed a complex ecosystem already. There are at least 6 different species working together, each one adapted to change a different aspect of the environment. This is advanced terraforming biology." As James worked, his submersible suddenly lurched to one side. The extremophiles had begun coating the vessel's exterior, interfering with its sensors and control surfaces. Warning lights flashed on his control panel. "I have a problem," James reported calmly. "The organisms are growing on my hull. They are blocking my forward sensors and causing control issues. I need to surface and clean them off." But before he could start ascending, more alarms sounded. The growth was spreading faster than expected, and it had clogged one of the submersible's water intake valves. The vessel was losing power. "James, get out now," Marcus ordered. But James was already moving, shutting down systems and preparing for emergency ascent. The submersible rose slowly, struggling against the weight of organisms coating it. Sarah immediately moved her vessel to help, positioning herself beneath James's submersible to provide support if needed. She used her mechanical arms to scrape some of the growth off his vessel, working with quick efficiency. On the observation platform, the Valorians watched in what looked like frozen terror. 2 of the humans were now in direct danger, and they could do nothing to help. They could only watch and hope that these strange Deathworlders knew what they were doing. James's submersible broke the surface, and he quickly assessed the damage. The organisms had died in the air and sunlight, but they had caused significant problems with his equipment. He needed to do manual repairs, which meant going outside. "I am suiting up for exterior work," James announced. He opened the submersible's hatch and climbed out onto its hull, wearing his environmental suit. When the Valorians saw James Park standing in the middle of the contaminated zone, in water that would boil their skin, manually repairing equipment with his bare hands, several of them simply stopped functioning. They stood or sat in complete stillness, unable to process what they were seeing. This was impossible. No one should be able to do this. James worked efficiently, removing fouled filters and replacing damaged seals. The water around him bubbled and churned with extremophile activity. Occasionally he would slip slightly on the wet hull, and the Valorians would gasp, certain he was about to fall to his death. But James just adjusted his balance and kept working. "Almost done," James said cheerfully. "Just need to clear this last valve, and I will be good to go." Dr. Chung and Marcus continued their work deeper in the zone, deploying sensors and collecting data. They discovered that the contamination had spread further than the Valorians knew. It had reached underground caves and channels that honeycombed the ocean floor. The situation was worse than anyone had thought. "We need to map these underwater cave systems," Marcus said. "If the organisms are in there, they will be much harder to eliminate." "Chun, can you take the mapping equipment down?" Chun agreed and began descending toward a large cave entrance she had spotted. The opening was dark and uninviting, surrounded by thick growths of extremophiles. She activated her submersible's lights and carefully entered the cave system. Inside, the cave was beautiful in a disturbing way. The walls were covered in colorful organisms that glowed with bioluminescence. The water was even warmer here, reaching nearly 50 degrees Celsius. Chun methodically mapped the tunnel, taking samples and readings. Suddenly, there was a deep rumbling sound. The cave walls shook, and pieces of rock began falling from the ceiling. The extremophile growth had weakened the cave's structural integrity. Chun immediately began backing out, but a large section of the ceiling collapsed behind her, blocking her exit. "I am trapped," Chen reported, her voice still calm despite the situation. "Cave-in has blocked my way out. I am searching for another exit." Marcus responded immediately. "Stay calm, Chun. We are coming to you. Can you see any other tunnels?" On the observation platform, Corval heard this exchange and felt their hearts sink. A human was trapped in the contaminated zone, in water hot enough to kill any Valorian instantly, inside a collapsing cave system. The Valorian scientists began preparing what they thought would be necessary: funeral rites and messages of condolence to send to Earth. Chun was not panicking. She was a scientist, and she approached this problem like any other. She activated her submersible's sonar and began scanning for alternative routes. The mapping equipment showed several small tunnels branching off from her current location. "I see a possible exit about 60 meters to my north," she reported. "It is narrow, but I think I can fit through." Marcus and Sarah were already moving toward Chun's location. When they reached the cave-in, they did not hesitate. Both climbed out of their submersibles in full environmental suits and began moving the rocks by hand. The boulders that had fallen were massive, each one weighing hundreds of kilograms. On Veloria Prime's low gravity, the rocks were easier to move than they would have been on Earth, but they still required significant strength. The Valorians watching could not believe what they were seeing. The humans were lifting and moving stones that would have required large machinery by Valorian standards. They worked together with perfect coordination, their movements powerful but controlled. This was Deathworld strength in action, within 20 minutes. Marcus and Sarah had cleared enough of the blockage to create a passage. Chun emerged from the narrow tunnel she had found, her submersible squeezing through an opening that looked impossibly small. "I am out," she announced. "And I got excellent data on the cave systems. The contamination goes deeper than we thought, but I have a complete map now." The three humans returned to their submersibles and continued working as if nothing unusual had happened. They spent another 4 hours in the contaminated zone, deploying sensors, collecting samples, and mapping the full extent of the problem. When they finally surfaced and returned to the platform, they found the entire Valorian observation team waiting for them. Corval approached slowly, their large eyes filled with an emotion the humans could not quite identify. "You survived," the Valorian said softly. "You went into our apocalypse, and you came back. You were trapped and endangered, and you simply handled it. How is this possible?" Sarah Walsh removed her helmet and smiled. "This is what we do, Corval. On Earth, we face dangerous situations all the time. We learned how to handle them, how to stay calm, how to help each other. It is just part of being human." That night, the human team analyzed all the data they had collected. The news was both bad and good. The contamination was more extensive than expected, reaching deep into the planet's underwater geography. But James had identified the organism's weaknesses. They were vulnerable to specific ultraviolet frequencies that Valoria, Prime's gentle sun, did not naturally produce. With the right equipment, they could sterilize the entire contaminated zone. But it would require building and deploying dozens of UV array generators throughout the zone, including in the deep caves and channels. It would require multiple dives into increasingly dangerous conditions. It would require humans to do what Valorians simply could not. Marcus looked at his team. They were tired but determined. "This is going to be the hard part," he said. "Are you ready?" They all nodded without hesitation. They were Deathworlders, and they had a planet to save. The days turned into weeks, and the human team fell into a grueling routine. Every morning, they would suit up and descend into the contaminated zone. Every day, they would install more UV array generators in carefully calculated positions throughout the infected waters. Every evening, they would return exhausted, but satisfied with their progress. The work was hard, even by human standards. The extremophile organisms had continued spreading, making the water more turbulent and chemically hostile. The temperature in some zones had reached 55 degrees Celsius, hot enough to be genuinely uncomfortable even for humans. The organisms fought back too, constantly trying to coat and damage the equipment the humans installed, but the team pushed forward. Sarah Walsh became an expert at installing the arrays in the deepest, most difficult locations. She could hold her breath longer than the others, and had an instinct for underwater construction that saved them hours of work. James Park studied the organisms constantly, finding new weaknesses and refining their approach. Dr. Chun mapped every centimeter of the contaminated zone, ensuring they knew exactly where each array needed to go. Captain Marcus Rivera coordinated everything, making sure his team stayed safe while pushing them to work faster. The contamination was spreading at an accelerating rate. They were in a race against time, and everyone knew it. The Valorians watched all of this with growing amazement. What had started as fear and horror had transformed into something approaching reverence. These humans worked day after day in conditions that would kill any Valorian in moments. They did not complain. They did not quit. They just kept working with a stubborn determination that seemed built into their very bones. Corval spent hours talking with Dr. Chun during her breaks between dives. The Valorian scientist had become fascinated by humanity and by Earth itself. Chun shared stories of her homeworld, and each story left Corval more astonished than the last. "On Earth, we have storms called hurricanes," Chun explained one evening. "Winds that can destroy buildings, rain that can flood entire cities, waves taller than your floating towers. And people just prepare for them and rebuild afterward. It is normal for us." Corval's large eyes grew even wider. "How do you live with such constant danger? How did you develop art and science and philosophy when you had to spend all your energy just surviving. Chun smiled. Maybe we developed those things because we had to survive. When life is hard, you need beauty to make it worthwhile. You need science to understand your world and make it safer. You need philosophy to find meaning in the struggle. Earth did not just make us tough, Corval. It made us creative and determined and compassionate, because those are survival traits too. The Valorian was quiet for a long time, processing this. We have lived in paradise for so long, Corval said finally. We never had to struggle, never had to fight for survival. Perhaps that is why we are so fragile now, not just in body, but in spirit. When crisis came, we did not know how to face it. You knew enough to ask for help, Chun pointed out. That takes wisdom and humility. Those are not small virtues. As the work continued, cultural exchange between the species deepened. Young Valorians began studying human history and culture, fascinated by these beings from a death world. Some Valorian artists created works inspired by the human team, trying to capture their strength and courage in delicate sculptures and paintings. The humans, in turn, learned to appreciate Valorian culture. Their music was hauntingly beautiful, composed of frequencies humans could barely hear. Their literature focused on harmony and balance in ways human art rarely did. Their architecture, which had seemed fragile at first, revealed itself to be brilliantly engineered for their environment. But then disaster struck. 3 weeks into the installation work, the contaminated zone underwent a massive expansion overnight. The extremophiles had reached some kind of critical mass, and their spread accelerated dramatically. What had been a 12% contamination rate jumped to nearly 25% in a single day. Marcus called an emergency meeting with his team and the Valorian leadership. The numbers were clear and brutal. At the new spread rate, they had less than 2 weeks to complete the installation and activate the UV arrays. If they missed that window, the contamination would be too extensive to stop. We need to double our work rate, Marcus said bluntly. That means longer dives, more risks, pushing our equipment and ourselves to the limit. His team nodded without hesitation, but the Valorian leaders looked distressed. Ambassador Nalith spoke up, their voice heavy with guilt. We cannot ask this of you. You have already done so much, risked so much. If you push yourselves this hard, some of you may die. We cannot accept that price. Sarah Walsh shook her head firmly. With respect, Ambassador, you are not asking us to do anything. We are choosing to do this. That is what humans do. When we commit to something, we see it through. The new schedule was punishing. The team worked 12-hour shifts in the contaminated zone, with only brief breaks for food and rest. The conditions were getting worse, too. In some areas, the water temperature had spiked to 65 degrees Celsius, genuinely dangerous even for humans. The chemical composition was becoming more corrosive, wearing down their suits faster than expected. 4 days into the new schedule, Sarah's equipment failed during a deep installation. She was working in one of the hottest zones when her suit's cooling system malfunctioned. The internal temperature began rising rapidly. Within seconds, she was in real danger. I have a problem, Sarah said, her voice tight with pain. Cooling failure. I need to surface immediately. But she was too deep, and the thermal shock of ascending too quickly could be as dangerous as the heat. Marcus made a split-second decision. He dove toward her position without even pausing to tell the others what he was doing. He found Sarah struggling with her ascent, moving too slowly because her overheated suit was affecting her motor control. Marcus grabbed her and began pulling her upward, using his own suit systems to help cool her down. The extra weight and the rapid ascent rate put enormous strain on his own equipment. Warning alarms blared in his helmet, but he ignored them. They broke the surface together. James and Chun were already there, having rushed to help the moment they heard the emergency call. They got Sarah out of her suit quickly, revealing angry red burns on her arms and neck. Her face was flushed from heat exhaustion, and she was breathing hard. Lisa Torres, the medical officer, was waiting on the platform. She immediately began treating Sarah's burns and checking for heat stroke. The injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. Sarah would need several days to recover. Marcus climbed out of the water, and his team immediately saw that he was not in much better shape. His hasty rescue dive had exposed him to dangerous heat levels, too. He had heat exhaustion and was dehydrated from the yaw. Extreme conditions. The Valorians who witnessed this rescue were torn between awe and horror. Marcus had risked his own life without hesitation to save his teammate. It was a level of selfless courage they had never witnessed before. But it also brought home the terrible reality. The humans were truly risking their lives for a world that was not even their own. That evening, the Valorian High Council called an emergency session. They debated late into the night, and many argued that they should stop the mission immediately. Losing human lives to save Valoria Prime seemed wrong to them. Better to accept their fate than to let these brave visitors die for them. Ambassador Nalith brought this proposal to the human team. The next morning, Dr. Chun, speaking for the group since Marcus was still recovering, listened respectfully and then refused firmly. "We appreciate your concern," Chun said, "but we did not come here to quit halfway through. Yes, this is dangerous. Yes, we might get hurt or even killed. But that is true of many things humans do. We explore dangerous places. We test experimental technologies. We go into burning buildings to save strangers. It is part of who we are. But why?" Corval asked, genuinely confused. "Why would you risk so much for people you barely know? For a world that is not yours?" Chun thought about her answer carefully. "Because we can," she said finally. "Because we have the strength and skills to help, and you do not. Because standing by and doing nothing when you can help is a kind of death too, a death of the spirit. Earth made us tough, but it also taught us that survival means helping each other. We carry that lesson wherever we go." The Valorians had no argument against this. They could only watch and wonder as these Deathworlders prepared to return to their dangerous work. Sarah Walsh insisted on returning to duty after only 2 days of recovery, despite Lisa's protests. Her burns were still healing, but she was determined to finish what she had started. Marcus was back in action too, moving a bit more slowly, but refusing to sit out while his team worked. With only 6 days left before the contamination became unstoppable, the team pushed themselves harder than ever. They installed arrays in the deepest caves, in the hottest zones, in the most turbulent waters. Every installation was a battle against the extremophiles, the harsh conditions, and their own exhaustion. On the final day before activation, they faced one last challenge. Someone needed to stay in the contaminated zone during the activation sequence to make real-time adjustments to the UV frequencies. The process would take 30 minutes, and whoever did it would be exposed to both the extreme environmental conditions and intense UV radiation that could cause serious harm, even through protective suits. Marcus volunteered immediately. His team started to argue, but he cut them off. "This is my call to make," he said simply. "I am the captain. This is what captains do." As Marcus prepared for this final, dangerous task, Corval approached him with an unusual request. The Valorian scientist had been changed by these weeks with the humans. Watching them face danger with courage had awakened something in Corval, a desire to be braver, to contribute more than just from the safety of observation. "Captain Rivera," Corval said quietly, "teach me how to be brave like a Deathworlder. I know I cannot survive in the contaminated zone like you can. I know my body is too weak, but there must be something I can do, some way I can help that is not just watching safely from a distance." Marcus looked at the fragile Valorian with new respect. "Courage is not about being fearless," he said. It is about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. You have already shown courage by asking for help and by accepting that you cannot do everything alone. That is harder for many people than physical bravery. The final activation was scheduled for the next morning. The fate of Valoria Prime would be decided in the next 30 hours. Marcus Rivera would descend into the contaminated zone one last time, and everyone hoped he would come back alive. The morning of activation arrived with clear skies and calm seas. All across Valoria Prime, millions of Valorians watched on their viewing screens as Captain Marcus Rivera prepared for his final descent into the contaminated zone. The entire planet seemed to hold its breath. Marcus stood on the platform, checking his specially reinforced suit one last time. This suit had extra shielding against UV radiation and enhanced cooling systems, but everyone knew it would still be a brutal 30 minutes. The heat, the chemicals, the radiation exposure, all combined would push even a human's endurance to dangerous limits. His team stood nearby, their faces showing worry they tried to hide. Sarah Walsh had tears in her eyes but said nothing. Dr. Chun gripped the platform railing tightly. James Park kept checking and rechecking the activation sequence on his datapad, as if finding one more decimal point of precision might somehow make this safer. Corval and dozens of other Valorian scientists monitored every sensor, ready to abort the activation if Marcus showed signs of critical distress. But they all knew that if they had to abort, Valoria Prime would be lost. This was their last chance. Marcus climbed into his submersible and turned to give his team one last look. He smiled, trying to appear confident. "See you in 30 minutes, he said simply. Then he descended beneath the surface and headed toward the center of the contaminated zone. The water around him grew darker and more violent as he penetrated deeper into the infection. The submersible's instruments showed temperature readings climbing past 60 degrees Celsius. The extremophile organisms swarmed around his vessel, sensing the intrusion into their territory. Through the thick viewing port, Marcus could see the alien landscape they had created, twisted structures of organic matter, glowing with bioluminescence. Releasing streams of bubbles and chemicals. He reached the designated position at the exact center of the contaminated zone and activated the communication system. "I am in position." Beginning activation sequence in 30 seconds. All across Valoria Prime, in cities and research stations and private homes, Valorians watched and waited. Many of them had come to care deeply about these humans over the past weeks. They had seen the team's courage, their determination, their kindness, despite their terrifying strength. The idea that Captain Rivera might die trying to save their world filled them with unbearable sadness. "Activation in 10 seconds, Marcus counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Activating now. Throughout the contaminated zone, the UV array generators came online simultaneously. Powerful beams of ultraviolet light flooded the water, tuned to the exact frequencies that would destroy the extremophile organisms. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The organisms began dying in massive numbers. The water churned and boiled as billions of microorganisms expired all at once, releasing their stored chemicals and heat. The temperature spiked upward, reaching 70 degrees Celsius in some areas. The violence of the die-off created turbulent currents that tossed Marcus's submersible like a toy. "Temperature is climbing," Marcus reported, his voice strained but steady. 72 degrees now. UV exposure is at expected levels. I am making frequency adjustments to Zone 3. He worked his controls with practiced efficiency, monitoring dozens of readouts and making tiny changes to optimize the UV output. Each adjustment improved the kill rate of the organisms, but also increased the danger to himself. The heat inside his suit was becoming unbearable, despite the cooling systems. The UV radiation was intense enough that he could feel it as a strange tingling sensation on his skin. 15 minutes in, Marcus announced. All arrays functioning at optimal levels. The organisms are dying faster than projected. This is working. On the observation platform, his team exchanged hopeful looks. Sarah wiped her eyes and managed a small smile. It was working. They were actually going to save this world, but then new alarms sounded on Marcus's control panel. The dying organisms had released a final surge of chemicals, creating a pocket of superheated water directly beneath him. The temperature in that pocket reached 95 degrees Celsius, genuinely dangerous, even with his enhanced suit. "I have a hot spot forming below me," Marcus said, his voice tight with pain. Moving to avoid it now. He maneuvered his submersible upward and to the side, trying to escape the thermal plume. But the dying organisms had created chaotic currents that fought his controls. The submersible lurched and spun, and for a terrifying moment, he lost orientation completely. "Marcus, are you okay?" Dr. Chun's voice came over the communication system, sharp with fear. "I am fine," he managed to say, though he was far from fine. The heat was overwhelming, and the turbulence was making it hard to keep his hands steady on the controls. But he still had 15 minutes to go, and the activation could not be interrupted now. He focused on his breathing, using techniques he had learned years ago for managing stress and pain. He compartmentalized, putting the discomfort in a mental box and focusing only on the data readouts and the frequency adjustments he needed to make. 20 minutes, he announced. Arrays at 97% efficiency. Mass organism die-off continuing. We are past the point of no return now. Even if I had to abort, the process would complete itself. This information brought relief to everyone listening. If Marcus had to evacuate now, the mission would still succeed. But Marcus had no intention of leaving early. He had committed to 30 minutes, and he would complete the full sequence. He continued making adjustments, fine-tuning the UV frequencies for maximum effectiveness. His hands moved over the controls with mechanical precision, even though they were shaking from heat exhaustion. His vision blurred occasionally, and he had to blink hard to clear it. Corval, watching the telemetry data, saw the danger signs in Marcus's vital readings. The human's core temperature was rising. His heart rate was elevated. He was approaching the limits of human endurance. The Valorian wanted to order Marcus to abort, to save himself, but Corval had learned something about Deathworlders over these weeks. They did not quit. They did not abandon their missions. Ordering Marcus to leave would be pointless. The human would stay until the job was done, or until his body gave out. 25 minutes, Marcus said, his voice noticeably weaker now. Final adjustments being made. Arrays will maintain optimal frequency automatically from this point forward. The last 5 minutes were the longest of Marcus's life. The heat was crushing, making every breath feel like inhaling fire. The UV radiation had caused painful burns on exposed areas of skin where the suit's coverage was thinnest. His muscles cramped from the heat and the effort of maintaining control. But he stayed at his station, monitoring the arrays, ensuring everything remained perfect. 30 minutes, he finally announced. Activation sequence complete. All arrays are operating independently now. I am ascending. The cheer that erupted across Veloria Prime could probably be heard from space. In every city, Velorians celebrated not just the success of the mission, but the survival of the brave human who had risked everything for them. Marcus's ascent seemed to take forever, but finally his submersible broke the surface. His team was already there in boats, ready to help him. When they opened his submersible's hatch, they found Marcus barely conscious, severely dehydrated, and suffering from heat exhaustion and radiation burns. But he was alive, and he was smiling. Lisa Torres immediately began emergency medical treatment while Sarah and James helped Marcus out of his suit. Dr. Chun held his hand. Not caring about the strength she usually had to be careful with. Marcus squeezed back weakly. Did we do it? He asked. Did we save them? You did it, Sean said, tears streaming down her face. You saved an entire world, Marcus. Over the following days, as Marcus recovered in the medical bay, the results of the activation became clear. The extremophile organisms were dying throughout the contaminated zone. The water temperature was dropping. The chemical composition was returning to normal. The infection that would have destroyed Veloria Prime was being eliminated completely. The Valorian High Council declared a planet-wide celebration. They announced that the day of activation would become an annual holiday, a day to remember when Deathworlders came to their world and taught them about courage and sacrifice. Ambassador Nalith visited Marcus in the medical bay, bringing with them a delegation of Valorian leaders. The ambassador's large eyes were bright with emotion as they spoke. Captain Rivera, on behalf of all Valorians, we thank you. We are creating a new honor, the highest our civilization has ever bestowed. You and your team will be named Guardians of the Fragile. You have shown us that strength without compassion is meaningless, but compassion without strength cannot protect what matters. You have both. Marcus, still weak but recovering, managed to sit up in his bed. We did what anyone should do when they have the power to help, he said simply. That is all. Corval stepped forward then, looking different somehow. The Valorian scientist stood straighter, spoke with more confidence. You have changed us, Captain. Changed me. I spent my life studying science from safe distances, never taking risks, never pushing boundaries, because we Valorians fear discomfort so intensely. Watching you and your team face danger has shown me that there is more to life than safety and comfort. We are beginning a new initiative on Veloria Prime. We call it the Deathworld Virtues Project. We will study courage, resilience, and sacrifice. Not to become like you, but to find our own forms of these qualities. Dr. Chun smiled at this news. She had spent many hours talking with Corval, and she was proud to see how the Valorian had grown. The human team stayed on Veloria Prime for another 2 weeks, monitoring the ocean's recovery and ensuring the UV arrays would continue functioning properly.